Welcome to MedMad Sparrow, where we make medical concepts easy to understand.
When you hear air pollution, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For most of us, it's our lungs, right? We think of coughing, asthma, that kind of thing. But what if the biggest threat isn't to our lungs at all? What if the most serious damage is happening somewhere much deeper, much more quietly, inside our brains? Today, we're diving into the hard science that shows how air pollution is a direct assault on the human brain.
To really get a grip on this, I want you to just think about something for a second. The simple, unconscious act of breathing. It's something you do thousands of times a day without even thinking about it. But what if I told you that in some of the world's biggest cities, every single one of those breaths is like taking a drag from a cigarette? Not just one, but a few of them, every single day. And look, that's not some crazy hypothetical. It's real. For someone living in a city like New Delhi, the air they breathe every day is the toxic equivalent of smoking about 4.3 cigarettes every day. That adds up to over 1,500 cigarettes a year, and they've never even lit one up. And that is the baseline for what we're talking about today, an invisible, forced habit that's poisoning millions of brains. Okay, so that baseline is pretty shocking, right? But here's the thing. This isn't just a New Delhi problem or an issue for a couple of other cities. We are looking at a full-blown, global, silent pandemic, and it's targeting our brains. Get this. According to the massive Global Burden of Disease study, air pollution has now become the second biggest killer on the entire planet. It's overtaken things we all worry about, like high cholesterol or malnutrition. And a huge piece of that puzzle isn't lung disease. It's catastrophic events happening inside our heads. So check this out. This chart is really interesting because it shows how these risks pile on top of each other. We've always known that things like high blood pressure and diabetes are major drivers for strokes. That's that big 68.8% chunk. But look at this other piece. Environmental risks, which is mostly air pollution, now account for almost 37% of all strokes worldwide. And they're not separate. Pollution is like a threat multiplier. It just makes every other risk factor you have that much more dangerous. And this chart really shows you just how unfair this whole crisis is. The burden is not shared equally, not even close. Low and middle income countries, they're dealing with over 20 million stroke cases tied to air pollution. Now compare that to high income countries at under 1.5 million. It's a staggering difference. It shows you exactly where this silent pandemic is hitting the hardest. So that brings up the big question, right? How? How on earth does a tiny speck of soot from a car's exhaust get past all of our body's defenses and end up inside our brain, literally destroying neurons? Well, the way it does it is terrifyingly clever. So let me introduce you to the main villain of our story, PM 2.5. Think of these as microscopic assassins. They're about 30 times smaller than a single human hair. They're so unbelievably tiny that they don't just get stuck in your lungs. Oh no, they can waltz right into your bloodstream and just start causing chaos everywhere. Okay, so there are two main ways these particles invade. The first one is basically a direct stealth attack. It's like a secret backdoor into the brain. When you breathe in these nanoparticles, they can land right on your olfactory nerve. You know, the nerve you use for smelling things? Well, it turns out that nerve is a direct highway from the outside world straight into your brain. These particles literally just crawl along that nerve, completely bypassing the brain's main security system, the blood-brain barrier, and get dumped right into really important areas like your frontal cortex. All right, the second route, it's even sneakier. It's like a Trojan horse. This time, the particles go from the lungs into your blood. And what scientists have seen is that they literally hitchhike on your own red blood cells. So your body's own oxygen delivery system becomes a taxi service for these toxins, carrying them to every single organ, including your brain. And once they get to the brain's tiny little blood vessels, they start attacking the blood-brain barrier from the inside, weakening its defenses and letting more bad stuff in. Okay, so the invaders are inside the fortress. Now what? Well, what happens next usually follows one of two devastating paths. One is a sudden, catastrophic explosion. The other is a slow, grinding decay that erodes who you are. And those two paths are ischemic stroke and neurodegeneration. One is a sudden blockage, a brain attack. The other is a slow burn, this chronic fire that leads to diseases like Alzheimer's. And here's the kicker. Both are being directly fueled by the air we breathe. So let's talk about stroke first.
Exposure to PM 2.5 literally changes the chemistry of your blood. It makes it stickier, more prone to clotting. It does this by activating your platelets and ramping up clotting factors. And this is the engine behind the terrifying rise of so-called young strokes, where you see people in their 30s and 40s perfectly healthy with no other risk factors having a massive stroke. Why? Because the air they've been breathing for years has turned their blood into a ticking time bomb.
And what about that slower path, the neurodegeneration? Well, scientists have a really powerful way of describing it. They say, the brain is on fire. See, these pollution particles trigger the brain's own immune cells, they're called microglia, and puts them into this state of constant high alert. But instead of protecting your neurons, they start spewing out toxic chemicals that actually damage them. It's this nonstop, low-grade inflammation that speeds up brain aging, and it's one of the absolute hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease.
And we can actually put a number on this. For every single tiny increase in long-term PM 2.5 exposure, we're talking just 1 microgram per cubic meter, the risk of developing the physical damage in the brain that we see with Alzheimer's goes up by a staggering 19%. A single microgram. It looks like there is simply no safe level of this stuff.
Okay, I know, all of this is incredibly alarming, but it is not hopeless. Far from it. Because while the threat is very real, the science also points to some clear, effective ways you can start building your own personal defense against this invisible assault. All right, so let's cut through the noise and separate what actually works from what doesn't. The science is crystal clear. Effective tools? High-efficiency or HEPA air purifiers for your home, proper N95 masks when you're outside on bad air days, and being strategic about your nutrition. What doesn't work? The myths. Things like holding a handkerchief over your mouth or thinking a few houseplants are going to clean your air. I'm sorry to say that's just not going to cut. Okay, so if you're thinking about getting an air purifier, there is only one acronym you really need to know. CADR. CADR. It stands for Clean Air Delivery Rate. Basically, it's the certified official measurement of how much clean air that machine can crank out. The higher the CADR number, the faster it cleans a bigger room. Simple as that. And here is the simple rule of thumb to make sure you don't get a purifier that's too weak for your space. Just take the square footage of your room and multiply it by 2/3. Whatever number you get, that is the minimum KDR you should be looking for. It's a super simple formula that makes sure the machine is actually powerful enough to make a real difference. All right, now let's talk about one of the biggest, most common myths out there, one that actually started with a misunderstood NASA study from way back in the 80s. And that's the idea that your houseplants will purify the air in your home. Yeah, about that, this slide really puts that idea into perspective, doesn't it? To get the same air cleaning power as even a small basic air purifier, you would need to cram over 1,000 plants into a single square meter of your room. So look, plants are awesome, they're great for your mood, but relying on them to protect your brain, it's just wishful thinking. And finally, you can build up your defenses from the inside out. Being smart with your nutrition can seriously boost your body's resilience. Curcumin, which you get from turmeric, especially when you have it with some black pepper, it helps activate your body's own antioxidant defense systems. Omega-3s from things like fatty fish or walnuts. They help put out that dangerous neuroinflammation we talked about. B vitamins are great for neutralizing a stroke risk factor that pollution makes worse, and vitamin C helps protect the lining of your blood vessels from damage. So let's wrap this up. We've seen the science. The link is undeniable. The health of your brain, your memories, your thoughts, the very essence of you is directly connected to the quality of the air you take in with every single breath. The evidence is all there. So the only question that's left is this. Now that you know this, what's the first thing you're going to